Welcome and thank you. And so this is our team. It's a small but mighty Commerce Clean Buildings team. So down below is our webpage address, and it's listed here, and our central inbox. If you email that inbox or that email address, it will go into that inbox and it can be directed to any of our team members. So I'd like to introduce and hand over the mic to Annika McDonald, our Incentive Program Manager.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I also want to mention that the presenters will be keeping their cameras off to preserve bandwidth. So this slide here represents our agency's purpose is to strengthen communities. Commerce touches every aspect of community and economic development. The Clean Buildings program sits within the Department of Commerce's State Energy Office. Our role is the administrator of the State Clean Buildings program. The Clean Buildings Law is an energy performance standard for existing non-residential buildings. Our agenda for today will cover the early adopter incentive guidelines and the input we have received, criteria, scenarios for the equity and inclusive incentive reservation, and outreach and support needed. This timeline reflects the workshops and planning we have completed for the early adopter incentive program. We want to thank everyone who has participated and provided input to shape the workshops and the guidebook. As an overview, Commerce will launch the Early Adopter Incentive Program July 1st of this year. This graphic here represents the incentive application schedule by building size. The incentive program is available for all buildings covered by the Clean Buildings Law with the inclusion of multifamily buildings. However, multifamily buildings are not required to comply with the law itself. $75 million is designated to the Clean Buildings Early Adopter Incentive Program. The incentive is a performance-based incentive of 85 cents per square foot of gross floor area. To qualify for this program, a building must be a covered commercial or multifamily building with over 50,000 square feet of gross floor area. The building must also be 15 EUI, energy use intensity, or more above their target. A building applicant must have at least one participating qualified electric utility, gas company, or thermal energy company providing or delivering energy services. To note, a qualifying utility is an electric gas company or thermal energy company who is allowed a public utility tax credit by the Department of Revenue. Utilities who do not pay public utility taxes are not qualified to participate in this program. The early adopter incentive is also a state incentive and can be administered in addition to utility conservation incentives or other state grants. To receive the incentive, the building must be brought into full compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard and reduce their EUI to or below the building's target. We want to thank the webinar participants and stakeholders for submitting input. We have updated the guidebook language and posted to our webpage the most latest version, and the input we have incorporated is a 6 or 12-month extension that may be applied to implementing energy efficiency measures or more time for measure and verification to ensure a building will meet their target EUI. The extension requests will be available when applying to the program through the Clean Buildings portal. We also have included terms and definitions into the glossary along with the template for the building improvement plan. Following the webinar, please visit our webpage to review the latest version, and we will be posting our final, version 1 next month.
All right, Annika, I think it's my turn. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thanks, Emily.
Annalyn, were you going to say something?
Nope, you're good to go.
Okay. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Emily Salzberg, and I'm the Managing Director of the Clean Buildings team here at Department of Commerce. Just want to extend a warm welcome. Thank you for joining us today. This is one of like over 20 public workshops that we have run over the last almost 2 years. As we've moved through rulemaking and gathering input on the incentive program. So we genuinely appreciate your participation and the feedback, input, and honest, dialogue we've been able to have over the last 2 years. So we appreciate it. So I want to talk a little bit about equity and inclusion in the context of our Clean Buildings program. And I think it's always helpful to think about the intent. Like, what is it that we're trying to accomplish and what is it that we ought to be considering? $75 million is really a very limited pool of funding when we consider the size of buildings that we are serving and that the incentive is based on a cost per square foot. So we believe that we have an opportunity to be thoughtful and intentional in how we design the program to ensure all building owners statewide have a chance to participate. This means recognizing that not all building owners will be ready to act on July 1, here just a couple months away when we launch the program. Certain populations and building types may have barriers to access. There are a number of different ways to consider equity and inclusion in our program. We can consider the building owners. We can consider what role the building plays in community, like how it's used and by whom. We can consider economic inclusion in how work is subcontracted out to the industry. And we can also consider outreach and technical assistance as a means to support access to information and resources. I want to provide just a bit of context on the statutory authority that state agencies are given with legislation when it passes and becomes law. The Clean Energy Transformation Act is really a great example of this. There are specific equity provisions included in CETA, and this provides clarity to Commerce on the authority that we have to approach equity and energy burdens specifically. The Clean Buildings Law does not include specific equity provisions. We do have clarity in law that we need to have statewide reach and to focus on the highest energy use buildings in order to maximize greenhouse gas emissions. We can also look to the recently published State Energy Strategy for guidance on how to approach the equity dimensions of our work. Annika, next slide. Thank you. So I just want to genuinely express our gratitude for such open dialogue as we move through this public process. Thank you to everybody who submitted your thoughts, your recommendations, and ideas. We've been gathering comments and input from stakeholder meetings about equity and inclusion since our very first meeting back in November of 2019. I remember leading a breakout group in person during the before times that explored fairness versus equity and how we may want to think about this in the context of our program. This slide includes a high-level summary of comments that we have received to date over the last almost 2 years. I do want to note that some input addresses elements specified in statute that Commerce does not have the authority to modify. For example, we had a suggestion to pre-fund incentives as energy efficiency measures are being installed to support access to upfront capital. Commerce does not have the authority to certify incentive payments until after 12 months of utility usage data has been verified post-upgrade. We do have the ability to provide technical assistance to help building owners connect with utility incentives and direct building owners to additional financing resources. Here's just a quick review of what we have heard. And again, these are just really high-level summary. A few overarching comments about equity and inclusion is that concern that first come, first served with the $75 million pot of funding will not result in equitable participation or distribution of benefits. Many of you are supportive of setting aside portions of funding to certain populations or sectors of buildings. However, some of you have expressed that any funding set aside for certain target populations or building types should roll back to a central resource if not utilized within a certain time frame. Many of you have provided suggestions on priority sectors and building types and goals. The ones that you have put forward is maximizing greenhouse gas emissions, so looking at that criteria at the building level, looking at geographic equity and rural considerations, focusing on building size, multifamily with an emphasis on affordable housing, highest energy using buildings, tax status, specific uses, and BIPOC-owned buildings. Around outreach and technical assistance, there's been suggestions around language access, translation materials that we're putting out there. What can we do to increase access around language? Targeted sector-specific workshops, so suggestions to be targeting our information and content to specific sectors, including housing providers, nonprofits, schools, healthcare, public buildings, et cetera. Many of you have emphasized the importance of development of tools and materials for compliance. And Annika will talk about that a little bit more at the end of the presentation when we talk about outreach and education. For subcontracting, many of you brought forward the importance of encouraging involvement by women, minority, and veteran-owned businesses, both certified and not. Delivering outreach and technical assistance to subcontractors specifically, and providing vendor lists in which we may want to identify women, minority, and veteran-owned businesses on those vendor lists. Process-wise, we had some suggestions to have a letter of intent for reservations to ease any upfront administrative barrier rather than a detailed application. And as I mentioned earlier, a suggestion around a pre-funding process, which we are not going to be able to move forward with that item given our authority. So that's a summary of the input that we have received to date. Annika, can you flip to the next slide? So criteria for consideration. We can look at these categories from statute broadly and included the specific RCW references there. We can see alignment with the input provided by stakeholders, which includes targeting the highest energy use buildings, ensuring we have statewide access to resources, especially in rural communities, actively engaging with affordable housing and multifamily property owners, and looking at the unique characteristics and needs within each building size cohort. Next slide, Annika. So let's talk about a couple different approaches. And we've got 3 different examples here just to kind of articulate how our approach would play out in distribution of benefits and access to the program. So let's just explore a few ways that we could approach this. So say, for example, we simply set up a first come, first served program. If we have a rush of applications that's primarily from the big buildings cohort, so these are buildings over 220,000 square feet, we would be serving less than 400 buildings across the state with no ability to ensure geographic accessibility. So meaning all of these buildings theoretically could be located in a central geography. In the second example, second bullet, if we were to set aside a certain portion of the funding to target, for example, buildings in rural communities, highest energy using buildings and multifamily, we still may be only able to provide access to 400 buildings or less. In the last example here, bullet 3, we can recognize that some of the smaller buildings with mandatory compliance being further off on the time horizon may not be ready to act as quickly. Within each building cohort, there are building owners with varying degrees of access to information and access to workforce capacity. If we consider portions of funding for each size cohort and then a portion of funding within each size cohort that can be reserved by buildings located in rural communities, highest energy using buildings and multifamily, we can better ensure that we have served a broader, statewide, and more diverse range of buildings. In this last example, we could serve over 1,000 buildings with this type of approach. I do want to recognize it's really difficult to estimate the number of buildings served because it's variable depending on the size of a building, and we don't yet know what our early and first applications are going to look like. So those numbers are subject to change a bit, but I just wanted to illustrate those for consideration. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. We invite you to share them now or follow up via email or phone, and let us know what you think and let us know if you have any recommendations on how to improve that. Just to let you know, that third bullet there is definitely the approach that Commerce is considering. We recognize we have some fine tuning and some guidance to develop and provide clarity around, but I just wanted to be really transparent about that. We are considering the approach articulated in the third bullet. All right, Annika, next slide. Unless there's questions to share. I see Amy's hand up. Hey, Amy, you want to come off mute?
Yeah, thanks. Back to the previous slide. Could you just articulate the second bullet again, just so I understand it?
Yeah, so the difference with that second bullet is considering $75 million in its entirety and carving out half of that for an equity and inclusive reservation. So, and then the rest would be just first come, first serve. So what we're articulating there is if we don't take building size into account, we're not ensuring that we can serve the needs and distribute benefits to those smaller buildings who have a compliance timeline further off in the horizon. Does that make sense? Amy, did that clarify?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, great. Any other comments or questions? Beth, I see Beth stand up. Beth, you want to come off mute?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I was just going to say, I like the idea of some of these other approaches. Just I know that we've definitely heard from some of like the larger organizations out there who are getting ready to apply like on day one. Like, you know, there's definitely organizations out there who kind of already have like an energy manager resource that's able to get things all in line for day one. And yeah, so just let's say let's support this idea of reserving some back.
Yeah, thanks for that input, Beth. Greg, I see your hand off. Why don't you come off of mute and then we'll jump into the chat box. I see some comments coming in.
My question is, we're one of those groups that potentially we're looking at what we could apply with on July 1st as a large, I'm with Western Washington University. I'm just curious, if we do an early application and aren't successful in a first round, would that application stay in some kind of queue, or would you have to watch the program and reapply?
Annika, do you want to address that with the wait list?
Sure, I can, and let me first start off, when you apply, so if you fall within the criteria of applying, so if your EUI is 15 above your target, that is the first criteria for applying to the program. So gathering that information, so completing the steps in the application, so that's completing Form B, Form C, Form D, and once you, and your building improvement plan, once you have the package of materials ready to upload to the portal, that's where Commerce will review it and will confirm with your utility that the tax credits are available for the incentive calculated. So at that point, then you get the green light to move towards implementing your energy efficiency measures. What we've identified in the guidebook is 18 months to implement your energy efficiency measures. If you find that you need additional time, that's where you can apply for the extension of 6 or 12 months. And then following, once you've implemented the energy efficiency measures, then you move into the reporting of measure of verification. That's where you are gathering the data that you've met your target. So if you decide to not have the additional time for implementing energy efficiency measures, you can request for the additional time to be applied to that phase. So there's that part of the application. So Commerce will not be reserving funds beyond the 75 million. So once the 75 million has been obligated for those folks who are going through the process, then we begin the wait list. So in the case where a building may not meet their target, we would release the funds, and then the next building in the wait list would move into the queue. Did that answer your question? If you
All right,
haven't,
thanks, Annika.
okay, thanks.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if there's any more detail that I can provide, you can always email the buildings inbox and I'd be happy to provide more detail.
Okay, thanks. I was having a hard time unmuting.
Oh, did that answer your question?
Yeah, because if you apply in one cohort, if you
Mhm.
fit that cohort, you
Mhm.
don't have the opportunity, I assume, to apply in a different cohort. And you would just have to watch for the wait list if you weren't successful in a first round.
So the cohorts are two different. So there's one that would be the general applications, and then the other that would be the cohort for the equity and inclusion. That
Yeah.
to apply for that cohort of the equity and inclusion, there will be some additional detail that we will require at the application in order to qualify into that reservation pool.
And I think I maybe misspoke. I was thinking more of the size tiers.
Oh, the
Of the
size
different-
tiers.
Yeah.
Yes. So the size tier, once you've applied into that size tier and your application has, if all of the funding has been obligated, then you would move into the wait list.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
But the initial cut is just first come, first serve.
So for the general and the equity, yes. But the general applications would follow the application requirements in the guidebook, and the equity inclusion reservation would follow some additional information that we would gather to qualify in that reservation pool. And that will be identified in the guidebook when we post next month.
Great, thank you, Monica. So we've got a couple comments in the chat box that I want to address and field. So Brian put in a comment, rather than a straight split of the funds per cohort, could it be weighted by quantity of building within each cohort? And we had David speak out in support of that comment. Yeah, and Brian, great suggestion. I think there is a lot of strengths with that approach, because then we can ensure that we're serving, roughly the same number of buildings in each cohort. I think the challenge or the weakness with that approach is we don't know the square footage of the buildings that are actually going to be coming through for the incentive. We might have buildings that are 500,000 square feet, or we might have, within that middle cohort, 90,000 to 50,000. We may have a whole bunch on the higher end of the square footage. So I just want to recognize there's some challenges in looking at a weighted value for that, but I appreciate the suggestion, and we'll definitely give that some consideration when we're looking at distribution of benefits. So thanks for that. So Robin added a comment, if the goal of the law is to get the most GHG emissions reduction, the highest energy users in each cohort should be the priority, not necessarily the quantity of buildings in each cohort. So Robin, thanks for that comment. And I just wanted to kind of play out an example here regarding the highest energy users. So basically what we're saying, for example, you are a building or you own a building that is, let's say 60,000 square feet. So you fit into that middle cohort, and you believe that you have a very high energy use intensity. Let's say instead of just 16 EUI over the target, you're 60 over the target. What we're saying is those funds that we've set aside for equity and inclusion, you would apply specifically for that pot of funding. And then based on the resulting savings and energy savings potential from that particular project, we would be evaluating the audit outputs and savings potential and ensuring that we have resources to the best of our ability to support those projects with the highest energy saving potential. So Raymond asked a question, what's the period of time before funds are released back to the main fund? My response to this is, what do you all think? We've had a couple suggestions thrown around. One was the suggestion of having 2 years for those funds to be reserved And then they would roll back into the broader, general resource. Another stakeholder suggested 3 years. I think with the thought that those smaller buildings are going to be potentially not quite as ready to act, knowing that mandatory compliance is just further out on the horizon. So we'd love to hear your thoughts about that. 2 years, 3 years, something in the middle, lower, higher. Let us know if you've got a position that we should consider. All right, Christine Bunch, for the second bullet point, is it possible to include a priority for buildings located in highly impacted communities? Department of Health disparities map. What other criteria under the second bullet might DOC consider, Commerce consider? Yeah, Christine, great question. And I think we need to explore that a bit further. What I have been considering and thinking about is what is the connection between highly impacted communities and geographic equity, and do we have a fit there? So I would welcome your thoughts on that. As always, we need to get input from our Attorney General. We need to get legal review on any of these kinds of decisions. Again, kind of speaking to my earlier point about statutory authority and making sure we're not going too far out on a limb with that, but I think that's definitely an area for consideration. So what other criteria under the second bullet might Department of Commerce consider? I mean, I think it's those considerations that I've spoken to, the highest energy using buildings, multifamily with a focus on affordable housing, and geographic equity. Annika, did I miss anything?
Nope, you got it.
Okay. Okay, Brian, I may be missing a helpful bit of info. My thought was more weighting by quantity versus area. In specific, the topic to mull is if we want equity across area or across building owners to permit a greater number of building owners to access funds rather than the square footage under those owners, weighting by cohort size versus cohort area may be one approach. Thanks for that clarification, Brian. Feel free to come off of mute if you want to add some discussion and clarify what you're thinking.
Yeah, so this is Brian. So in terms of how the pot would be split, whether it's just sort of straight down the middle over the 3 cohorts, or some sort of weighting, my thought is whether you want to weight by like building, like area under each gross area for each cohort versus the number of building owners represented in each cohort. And I think the thing I'm kind of wrestling with a little bit is, does equity mean like serving, do we equitably want to serve each square footage, or are we thinking about these as kind of unique individuals and building owners who we want to equitably permit access to these funds?
Yeah, Brian, those are great questions for consideration. Thanks for clarifying. I think I missed that intent with your original comment. So thanks for bringing that forward, and we definitely will consider that.
Can I chime in with that one? This is Anna. So I think what I love the idea, Brian. I think that's a really thoughtful approach to this. What makes it really tricky is that the assessor data is really incomplete, and as such, we won't really have an estimate of the number of buildings in each cohort until building owners go in and confirm their square footage. And so based on that, I think we can probably reasonably state that the largest cohort of buildings will be the ones within that 50 to 90,000 square footage range. But until building owners go in and look at the assessor data and compare it to, their own building plans and give us that information, we don't know what cohort they fall into.
Thank you, Anna. All right, Raymond suggested 12 months unless proof that retrofits are ongoing is provided, 24 months if nothing has been done. Another comment by David, perhaps semi-annual updates to track progress. Thanks for those comments. That's helpful. Tyson, once the application is submitted, are the incentive dollars reserved for that facility? The challenge is related to EUI targets that are very aggressive. If a client implements items and does not reach their target EUI initially, could they lose their reserved incentive? Annika, I'm wondering if you want to take that question or
Sure,
kick it
I
to
can-
Luke. What do you think?
I can take that question. So we have built in 36 months for the implementation and the meeting the EUI. So 12 months, well, 18 months to implement measures and 18 months for reporting and your measure and verification, so meeting your EUI. If a building is particularly tricky and thinks they need additional time, that's where you can request the 6 or 12 months in addition. So that if a building, even with the additional time, does not meet their EUI, then yes, the incentive reservation would be released, and then a building from the wait list would move into that slot. But the intention is to make sure that projects are moving through the process and that it's not tying up funds. So really, that's the important part of that level 2 audit. It's the audit that provides enough rigor that can really make sure that a building meets their target. Luke, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm not too sure what I would add. I think you covered it pretty well.
Okay.
You know, this is part of the reason why the incentive requires a level 2 ASHRAE energy audit. So we have more assurance that the projected savings can be will occur.
Thanks, Luke.
All right, we have just a few more comments and questions. Greg says, I support annual progress reports to encourage projects not to stall. 3 years is a useful maximum. Thanks, Greg. That's a great suggestion. Shout out to Anna. Thanks, Anna. That was a helpful response. And anybody who has not yet met Anna, Anna is our data lead and going through the incredible journey of 39 counties worth of assessors data to identify buildings. So I just wanted to do a quick thank you to Anna and the team for all of the hard work on that. So Perry, I advocate for GHG emissions as a top priority in the evaluation of applications. There are North American jurisdictions who started with energy disclosure laws are now revising with emissions reduction as benchmark, not just energy. Are there ways Commerce can prioritize GHG emission reduction in application and other processes, and discussion of law modification to get at GHG directly? Perry, thank you for bringing this comment forward. There's like so many different ways to approach your comment here. One of the things I would start with is the law itself points to ASHRAE Standard 100, which is based on site energy use intensity. So while maximizing reductions of greenhouse gas emissions is our priority, the standard does so through reduction of energy use at the building. You bring forward a really good point though, like where do we have misalignment in our policy here in the state of Washington when we consider our state greenhouse gas limits? And anybody who's had a read through the state energy strategy and specifically the buildings chapter, that's an area that's called out specifically. Like if the state is going to meet its GHG limits, like we need to work on having a bit better alignment between programs, utility efforts, and our state's targets. So yeah, it's spot on with your comment. Any discussion of law modification to get at GHG directly, at some point it's something we're probably going to want to consider. At this point in time, what I can tell you is we're going to be using GHG emissions reductions as a reporting metric as part of our required reporting to the legislature. And as we move through time and gain more experience with implementation, like it's our hope that we can have those kinds of metrics available for the public and accessible on our website. So definitely really appreciate that comment. GHG rather than EUI is an equity issue. Reducing fossil fuel combustion in large buildings have direct health impacts on communities where facilities are located. Agreed. Also health impacts to the building occupants themselves. So Perry, thank you for those comments.
I want to thank you
Greg,
for your response.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for your response, the comprehensive nature of it, especially the emphasis on the state energy strategy, because that's really where the heart of my question comes from. Is that, and I feel like this is a can we walk and chew gum at the same time, given where equity issues have just risen to a much higher level, as well as our climate change emergency resolutions and various laws just passed this past session. I'm glad to know that you are aware of it. I'm hoping that Commerce takes an official approach to report back the need to get alignment.
Couldn't agree more, Perry. Thank you for those comments. All right, last comment here, Greg. Does assessor data at least provide an accurate proportion in aggregate?
Want me to take that one?
Anna, do you want to field this one?
Yeah. So unfortunately, not always. In fact, I think in most cases I would say no. And the reason why I would say that is there was a separate law that passed in, I believe it was 2012 or 2013, that allowed assessors not to assess exempt properties. So exempt properties include schools, include in some counties hospitals, also include any government-owned facilities. And as a result, often information about the square footage of those buildings is just not in the assessor data. So because that's missing, in order to identify buildings, we enlisted the help of Esri, and we're using GIS methodology to effectively try to estimate building sizes, compare that with the assessor data, and really use the assessor data for the addresses to notify buildings. But yeah, it's been really tricky to work through. I know a lot more now about what is in and not in the assessor data than I did when I started this project, for sure. The other, I think, major issue with the assessor data is for campus buildings, for buildings that are on, if you've got a university campus, for example, where you've got one parcel, a lot of buildings on that parcel. The assessor data doesn't always distinguish each building on the parcel. So, you know, what I'll see is a bunch of square footage for different things that are part of the built environment attached to the parcel, but I can't tell what is attached to which building. So, you know, unfortunately, the assessor data is just, again, it's just proven really tricky to work with.
I have a follow-up question to that report. Specifically, I know that's the July 1st deadline. Commerce needs to notify the property owners, but I'm wondering who you're going to be notifying, especially in larger organizations like municipalities, and can the energy manager play a cooperative role in terms of helping you solve some of these questions about what is the data?
That's a great question. So we are notifying whomever is listed in the assessor data as the property owner is going to be the one to get the notification. And I think that that's part of what's in statute is we have to use the assessor data to notify. I know that Beth at PSE and I have been talking a little bit about how do we try to get it so, you know, we're notifying the assessor, but then the utilities also have contacts on their side. And so after July 1st, I plan on addressing that a little more directly. Just there's so many buildings to notify right now that I've got, you know, I've just got the assessor data front and center in my brain. But I like that idea and I'd be really interested in exploring it more.
All right, thank you, Perry. Thank you, Anna. All right, Jeff, with your leaning to option number 3, will you publish clear selection criteria for both general applications and equity and inclusive applications so that owners can make an informed choice which program to apply to and whether to apply? Jeff, absolutely. We'll plan to release a revised version of the guidebook, including that guidance by July 1. All right, I think we made it through the chat box. Thank you so much for those thoughtful comments and questions. Feel free to keep them coming if that is helpful. What I'm going to do is go back into the presentation. I think we'll finish it out and then address questions. Annika, does that sound like a good plan?
Sounds great. I'll move on to the next slide.
Okay, and we're on slide 14. I believe. Okay, here we go. So switching gears just a bit from the building served, I want to talk just a little bit about economic inclusion and the subcontracting workforce community. Any program with a capital spending component stimulates the workforce and contributes to economic vitality of the construction sector. We have an opportunity with our Clean Buildings program to build awareness for how these funds are spent and to explore inclusivity in the business community that delivers work for clean buildings compliance. We're developing an inclusion plan that will be included in the incentive application. Inclusion plans outline the commitments that a building owner, contractor, vendor, or consultant makes to increase spending with small and diverse businesses. They also allow for visibility by and collaboration with, an agency such as a state agency like Commerce to develop a comprehensive strategy to engage and identify the eligibility and availability of small and diverse businesses. Once we have a better sense of the subcontracting community and spending in general, we can develop a data-informed strategy for our clean buildings training workforce efforts. Our technical assistance needed to connect building owners to small and diverse businesses and produce a range of tools to support economic inclusion with subcontractors and industry professionals. Annika, next slide, and I think it's back to you.
Thanks, Emily. So next we'll be discussing outreach and support. So the Clean Buildings program staff are here to help. Anna Lindbergen has done a really beautiful job of revamping our webpage. We now have a customer support and resource section. There you will find videos and documents on the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. There's also a early adopter incentive program tile here on the right corner. There's a Q&A document that explains a quick overview of the early adopter incentive program. Coming soon, we will have a video on the application process and discuss the guidebook in that as well. We recognize there are additional resources that could be helpful. Please use the chat to type in any ideas you have. We also have a Smartsheet link to the education and outreach requests that we will be posting to the customer support and resource section as well for any future ideas that you may have. But if you have any ideas off the top of your head right now, we would love to hear about them. You can just post them in the chat and Annalyn will read them over. And if you can't think of any at the moment, we will have that Smartsheet link posted here soon to the customer support and resources.
Hi, Annika. We have a suggestion for links to utility energy efficiency websites. We actually currently have that on our customer support and resource page. See, I'm sorry, I'm kind of looking for the title of it. If you look in the customer support and resources page under financing, it says utility energy efficiency and incentive program links. I believe that's what you're looking for. If not, let us know and we will look into that. Thank you.
Annalyn, can you pop the link into the chat box?
Sure will.
Thank you. All right, Annika, are we on the next slide while folks are sharing their thoughts and input? Okay, I'm going to do a quick wrap up of next steps and then we can continue to field questions and gather input that y'all want to put forward. So next steps, as Annika mentioned, we're going to be looking to finalize the guidebook and post that in May. The guidance specifically around selection criteria, as Jeff, you referenced, likely will not be ready in time for that May release of the guidebook, and so we'll issue that as a supplement to or an appendix to the guidebook. The Clean Buildings Incentive Application webinar is date still TBD, but will be in June. Annika, do you want to talk a little bit more about the contents of that webinar and what we're thinking?
Sure. So this will either be a webinar or a video. We will give an overview of how to apply to the incentive program through the Clean Buildings portal. So that will review all of the documentation you will need, the forms, and that will also review what sort of information we'll need for the equity and inclusive reservation. So it will be an overview of the guidebook and the application process through the portal.
Thanks, Annika. All right, last note is don't forget to visit our Clean Buildings webpage and sign up for program updates. The webpage has gone through, as Annika mentioned, a significant overhaul. Annalyn has done a phenomenal job with our website work, and we really welcome and invite your feedback on what we can be doing to make not only the information more user-friendly and accessible, but also if there's anything missing that would be helpful, please let us know. I'm going to jump back into the chat box. Team, are you ready to help me field questions and comments?
Yes.
All right, Amy, tagging on to Perry's question, I think it would be good for you to share a draft of what the building notification looks like with stakeholders in advance for feedback. Amy, thanks for that suggestion. Yeah, the notification letter is something that we're working on right now and figuring out all of the mechanics of printing and mailing. So thanks for that suggestion, and we'll take that into account. All right, Kevin, so a level 2 audit is required for the incentive application. If so, is there a reason that buildings which can't easily calculate an EY due to metering complexities and are required to follow the investment criteria pathway for standard compliance cannot be eligible for the incentive, since a level 2 audit is also required in that instance? Annika, Luke, who wants that one?
That is, go ahead, Luke.
So Anna, you can back me up here, but it's specifically stated in the legislation that the incentive program is only available for those meeting the target EUIs. So we're kind of bound by those rules.
That's perfect. I don't have any additional to that, Luke. Thanks.
All right, another comment from Amy, rather than linking to the CPACE website from Better Buildings, link to King County's website and other counties as they start implementing CPACER. Amy, thanks for that recommendation. Again, we welcome any kind of feedback on how to improve our website and where we're directing traffic. Want to do a quick check-in. Perry, I see your hand up. I'm wondering if you have another question or if that was from earlier.
Earlier.
Okay. Thank you. Sandra, providing blog post language for various organizations to share with their members, such as BOMA, IFMA, and that jurisdictions could share in their own newsletters. Yes, Sandra, great suggestion. Building owner notification is just one piece of the activity we're going to be supporting around building owner notification starting July 1 and then, throughout the summer. from like an awareness building campaign, there's so much work to do to get the word out there through newsletters and social media. And so yeah, any specific suggestions that you have about that, organizations that we may not have thought of or connected with, we would love that feedback. Okay, Perry, in your letter to the listed party and assessors database, suggest language like Commerce recommends property owner inform your facility management leadership of both compliance requirements and incentive funding. Whether internal staff or external business facility management will play a large role in your successful response to these incentives and obligations. Thanks, Perry, that's a great suggestion. Jeff, question, would multiple early adopter applications from the same owner be each reviewed on their own merits?
The answer is
Annika,
yes.
you want to take this one?
Yes, the answer is yes. So it's reviewed at a building level, not by the owner. How many applications an owner submits.
All right, Mike, thank you for this question. I'm not sure how to answer this one. Will Commerce update available funding real time starting in July? Annika, Anna, I'm not sure about our ability to provide that real time feedback, but it's probably something that we want to consider. Mike, your follow-up comment is no use submitting applications in August if funding is exhausted. And the one thing I do want folks to keep in mind is we're going to have a running wait list, and we're going to have buildings that for whatever reason, there's going to be a whole lot of different reasons, aren't able to move forward with the incentive program. So there is value in being on the wait list, because those are the buildings we'll turn to if we have any buildings drop out of the program. All right, Beth, following up from Jeff's question, have you considered incentive caps for organizations? For example, a large retail chain with multiple buildings across the state that is preparing many early adopter incentive applications for day one could tap into much of the first come, first served dollars. Beth, yes, this is definitely something that we are aware of and certainly concerned about. I think the way that I would address this question is there's nothing in the statute that allows us to cap the incentive by building owner, but I think it's something that we ought to consider from a distribution of benefits standpoint and get some input from our AG on. I don't know, Annika, anything you want to add to that one?
No, other than it's not identified that we in statute or in law that we can't limit the number of applications that someone submits.
Yeah, thank you. All right, Craig, thanks for this feedback. It takes significant effort by owners to make these applications if application requirements are not finalized until June. Big race to submit in July. That turnaround seems inherently inequitable. Yeah, and thank you. I appreciate that honest feedback. I think my response to that is that we are looking at the pre-application being as streamlined as possible and being able to place the incentive reservations in a way that's as streamlined as possible. And we recognize it's a tight timeline. Unfortunately, our team is just doing our best to meet the dates that are outlined for us in statute and with the launch of the program. We would like to think that we've been, or believe that we've been very clear about the contents of the guidebook. We've gotten input, kind of the whole way through that process. So I think the piece that we were talking about finalizing in June is the selection criteria for the equity and inclusive reservation, not for the components of the applications. I want to be really clear about that. That's pretty well settled and is accessible now in the guidebook that we have posted on the website. Annika, what would you add to that?
I think I don't have any additional comments to that. I think you've said it exactly what would be in my thoughts. So we appreciate that, and we recognize that. And that's where we are here to provide the support needed for those that may need additional assistance for applying to the program.
All right, thanks, Annika. Sandra, thank you for this comment. An expansive wait list might also serve as support for the state to allocate more funding. And yeah, such an important point here. You know, as we are just coming out of legislative session, you know, it's really important for us when we're working to secure funding to support these types of programs that we can document need. And so if we do have an expansive wait list of buildings and building owners that haven't been served, that's helpful information for us to have heading into session, you know, future subsequent legislative cycle and budget session. One piece that I do want to bring forward is these incentive dollars, as you know, from the Clean Buildings Program, do not prohibit the ability of building owners to apply for other grants and financial incentive programs. So a great example of this is the Commerce Administered Energy Efficiency Program, which is available to public buildings, schools, all kinds of different entities. OSPI also has a number of different modernization grants that are available, and there is definitely an opportunity for building owners to leverage other programs that are available and layer on multiple resources and benefits to make these types of projects work. I'm not sure, you know, how closely everybody was tracking the recently passed budget from the legislature, but there is, you know, a new program within the Clean Energy Fund that's focused on building electrification, and it explicitly states that program can be run in conjunction with the incentives administered through the Clean Buildings Program. So I think we're going to have a great opportunity to think about how to better and more comprehensively serve building owners here in the state of Washington.
And there's also utility incentives.
Absolutely. Thanks, Annika. All right, will public buildings be encouraged to apply for other available state funding? I mean, Amy, I mean, yes is how I would answer that. You know, we have, and there's a number of different ways to look at public buildings, and there's a number of different avenues that we have to connect with public building owners. Hopefully my response to the last question kind of addresses what, you know, your question is here or intent behind it, but let me know if there's something else that we ought to be thinking about.
Yeah, I guess this is more communication and outreach, just of you know, even considering in the notification, if it's possible to, if you've identified that a building is a public building, letting them know that there are other sources of funding. So this just gets back to my original question of it would be great to have a little bit of a look into what that notification is going to look like, and that could help cities and utilities be prepared as well for what kinds of questions they might get.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Amy, for that feedback. Okay, a couple more comments. So Kevin, question, is there a central resource for identifying women, minority business enterprises and veteran businesses that could perform related work for building owners? Example, M&V services, retrofit work, so that we can be more intentional about contracting their services. Great question. The state has an Office of Women, Minority Business Enterprises, and they have a certified list of businesses all throughout the state. I think that's a very helpful resource, and we will be working to partner more closely with that agency on that resource. And you know, we will continue to look for opportunities, again, to increase visibility about and make those connections between building owners and the subcontracting community in the spirit of economic inclusion. Robin, a number of applications caps should also distinguish between for-profit and nonprofit or public building owners. Thanks for that feedback, Robin. We appreciate it. All right, Tyson, in summary, the early adopter incentive first come, first serve means the first building to meet their energy target, correct? This means the facilities that already meet their EUIT will get the incentive, not the facilities that need the incentive to greatly reduce their energy consumption. How do you plan to reserve dollars to those facilities that need to substantially reduce their energy consumption? So Annika, let's tag team this one. I think the first, comment is to be eligible for the early adopter incentive program, the buildings need to be 15 EUI over the target that we've set by building type. So facilities that already meet their target would not be eligible for the incentive. They've got to be 15 above the target.
That's correct.
Annika, anything you want to add?
No.
Okay.
So in the reservation of dollars, so if we were to go with the third bullet where we've identified the different cohorts of build, and we would reserve the 12.5, well, the 25 by cohort, and then 12.5 for the equity and inclusion and for general population. So that's where those needing to reduce the energy consumption, they would fall within the highest energy users. So there would be a different path of reservation for them based on their energy consumption, if they qualify based on their EUI.
I guess.
No, I just want.
Sorry, this is Tyson, but sorry from our experience, we've done a number of these projects for different clients across the country, and I think the challenge here that I'm just foreseeing is you have participants that are slightly above on the EUI, which is 15 is pretty darn close. That's not a large jump, but you're probably going to have some buildings that are substantially higher than the EUI. And in those buildings are going to be maybe 50 points higher, possibly double the EUI. And those are the buildings you really need to get a handle on their energy consumption and will really be reliant on this incentive. But I'm concerned that those clients or those facilities, it's going to take quite a bit of an effort in this early incentive program. They probably won't be able to hit it. So how would you reserve dollars for these bigger entities that are substantially higher?
Tyson, that's a great question, and I'll take a swing at it with some help from my colleagues here. So what we were exploring is the idea of having funding that's available for the highest energy using buildings within that reservation system. So let's say we have a school facility that is like 60 over the target that we've set by that building type. It's eligible for the incentive program, but it's dramatically above that 15 EUI over the target. So that building could be considered from a maximizing energy saving standpoint, eligible for those equity and inclusion dollars. So that's one of the ways in which we would evaluate that. That building may also be eligible to receive just the general, first come, first serve pot from that building cohort as well. We do recognize with some of those buildings where it's a bigger leap to get within the target. It may be an iterative process. There might be 12 months of utility usage data that don't verify that that building has met the target. And during that point in time, we do have administrative processes in place to request more time and to do more work. Annika, I'm wondering if you want to speak to that a bit more specifically and give an overview. Can I put you on the spot for that?
Sure. And I also want to mention that is the intention of the documentation that we'll need. So it's to determine if the building can meet their target. So that's the forms that will need to be completed. That's the building improvement plan. That's knowing that your EUI is 15 above the target and knowing what your target is. So all of the documentation will need to be reviewed by Commerce and verified. So once that verification is in place, then the reservation is then the building has the reservation. So, and if within the time that we've allotted in the guidebook, so the 18 months for implementing energy efficiency measures and 18 months for the measure and verification reporting, that's where you can request more time to implementing the energy efficiency measures or more time for reporting. Some buildings may take some more fine tuning. You may find that you've met your target 6 months into your 18 months and you need 12 months of consecutive utility data. That's where requesting the additional time will give you time to fine tune that building and meet the target. Luke, do you have any additional input for that?
No, I think
Okay.
it's been covered.
All right, just a few more questions and comments. Christine, building on Beth's idea for caps, could incentives be limited for buildings that are already receiving other state funding? Possibly, and we could consider it. This is an interesting thought because it's like benefits and trade-offs. Sometimes having the opportunity to layer multiple fund sources and related benefits can be the only mechanism to move that project forward. Ideally, that's how we want to be using state resources, is to support work that otherwise couldn't happen. But yeah, you've kind of presented this, I guess, in a different way that I was talking about it earlier. Christine, feel free to come off of mute if there's any further thoughts you want to share on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. I guess I was just thinking also from an equity standpoint, we know that building owners who tend to apply for these types of funds generally have more resources than other building owners. And so the thought was really thinking about building owners who don't usually have access or have less access to state funds, just because it's quite a, it's a lot to apply for those funds and to have the resources to do so. And so just sort of thinking about also how to spread the existing 75 million across more buildings. But yeah, definitely hear what you're saying.
Yeah, benefits and trade-offs, right? Like I'm thinking about our energy efficiency grant program, and one of the approaches we have is working with public buildings. And many public buildings are challenged in their ability to secure, capital resources for upgrades. And so, like, is it better to have a building apply for like an exemption, or is it better to support that building to move forward with the work with potentially benefiting from 2 incentive dollars? I don't know the answer to that one, but I appreciate you bringing that forward. All right, Sandra, apologies if this has been discussed already. I needed to step out for a minute. Hopefully you had a wonderful cup of coffee, Sandra, or tea, whatever your pleasure is. Even if there is a segmentation of funding by cohort within each cohort, it seems like there is still the concern with first come, first served. Instead of rolling application, could there be a number of set application deadlines, and then the full group of applications is reviewed together and prioritized on equity, GHG, and other criteria? Sandra, thanks for this comment and this question, and I think it's definitely something to consider. I think what you're putting forward here would really just enable Commerce to look at the broader, pool of applications, and then would just delay the timeline in which we could provide confirmation of that reservation. So I appreciate you bringing this suggestion forward. And everybody participating on the line, it's my sincere hope, over the last 2 years together, doing this type of public process, that we've demonstrated like a willingness to take input into consideration and use that to inform and even sometimes change decision making. So if you've got some strong thoughts to share about that, or a better way to approach it, like we would love to hear that. All right, Jeff, if a building is on a wait list for funding, does this eligibility require it wait to implement reductions until it hears about acceptance from the waiting list? So Jeff, I think what you're asking is, if a building owner is applying for the incentive program, should they wait to implement the EEMs until it hears about the reservation acceptance? So I think how I would approach this answer, team jump in, if you've got a different perspective. But I think that my answer to this is it depends. If in the Clean Buildings Incentive funding would basically prohibit this type of work from moving forward without it, then it would seem reasonable to hold off on initiating work and executing contracts until you have a confirmation of the reservation. The other side to that, though, is if you know the building is over the target, mandatory compliance is coming, albeit a few years out, any work that's done during the incentive period will only be working to the, make that building more likely to comply with the target once mandatory compliance starts. Team, what would you add to that? Or Jeff, anything I missed with your question?
Let me rephrase it a little bit, Emily. It's tough to do for me in
Yeah.
writing. So the question I think is we're on a wait list, and because of compliance, we choose to move ahead with some of that work. Does that disclude us from being still eligible for early adopter incentive if we've already started?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that question. That makes more sense now. It is not my understanding that would preclude that building owner from being eligible for the incentives if they move from the wait list to the reservation. Annika, do you have a different opinion about that?
So are you implementing the reductions before July 1st?
No, I'm saying
No,
on July 1st,
Okay.
I submitted
Okay,
that
got it.
application and I get put on the wait list.
Okay, I'm
and I
just confirming.
proceed. Yeah.
Okay, that's the way I thought I heard it. So thank you. I would agree with Emily. And this is something I'm glad that you've made this point, and I'm making a note of this. And this is some more detail that we will definitely need to include in the guidebook and really flesh out. So I appreciate your comment here, and it gives definitely makes me think about more detail that we need to put into the guidebook.
Great, thanks, Annika. And Jeff, that answered your question, yes?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. All right, Nancy, the rural-urban distinction is key for the equity criteria. Access to resources like contractors and professionals is more limited, meaning the playing field is not level. Agreed. I think that's, one of the many considerations about supporting compliance in rural versus urban, settings. So thanks for bringing that comment forward. Oh my gosh, I'm getting sick of hearing myself talk. Annalyn, do you want to take the chat box?
I got it.
Okay, we're on Mike James right now. It's 2020. You want to take it from here?
Okay, Mike James.
Thank you.
Is 2020 eliminated from the energy baseline calculation? Many buildings had limited capacity and use based on pandemic impacts. May not be fair to use 2020 as the baseline year. Increased occupancy and use leads to increase energy use. Annika, Luke?
Luke, would you mind taking this one, please?
Yeah, so as it stands, the standard itself allows you to use 12 consecutive months of utility data taken from the previous 2 years. So and this is based on when the energy audit occurs. So if the audit was to take place in July 2021, you could go back to July of 2019, which if you used 12 consecutive months from July 2019 to July of 2020, you would get a portion of the usage would be from pandemic times. So we should evaluate and maybe make some exceptions in this case so that we can get 12 months of normal occupancy energy data. This would be something we could put in the guidebook itself. It's because it does vary a bit from where the standard, how the standard is written.
Great, Annalyn, this will be our final question, and then any additional questions or comments, we welcome folks to email us at our buildings inbox.
All right, thanks, Annika. Thanks, Luke. Comment from Nicole. These are really amazing ideas, but I'd caution that having a lot of hoops, deadlines, or criteria to meet can be a disincentive for an equitable process. Try to keep this as equitable and straightforward of a process as possible.
Great, thanks, Nicole. We appreciate that, and we will work to making sure that this is a really straightforward process for everyone, and that it doesn't require a lot of hoops and barriers. We appreciate that.
Thanks, Annika. Perry had his hand up for a while, and I was wondering if he just still wanted to speak, or did you?
Yeah, I can. I think Mike James' point is a big one. I think that buildings where occupancy is a dominant factor in energy consumption, that anything from March 2020 until the pandemic is over is going to be fraught with not the kind of data that we should be basing our EUIs on. So I think that's an important point for the Congress to come back and address.
Yeah, and this is Luke. So yeah, and on top of that, even if you still qualify as far as the 15 EUI over the target using pandemic months, it's kind of a false sense of what your what effort you need to put in. So yeah, I would certainly recommend that the pre-implementation energy data be during normal occupancy. So we will certainly put that something to address that in the guidebook.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Luke. Thanks, Perry. Mike James has a question. Self-qualification is July 1st. When is more detailed application due?
All applications will be accepted July 1st. Self-qualification is the first step to preparing your materials for your application. That could be done prior to July 1st. So thank you everyone so much for participating in this call. We really appreciate you have wonderful ideas. You have shaped this guidebook and our webinars, and we welcome your ideas for customer resources that we could be developing. Please visit our webpage. Please submit your ideas to our webpage. And if you have any additional comments or questions, please email our Clean Buildings inbox. And with that, this concludes our webinar.